time with the member for Edmonton Manning. I begin my comments regarding Bill S4 by acknowledging the hardworking and law-abiding citizens of my riding in Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. During these challenging economic times and the troubling revelations Canadians are hearing every day in testimony from the Emergencies Act trial, Canadians in my riding and across the country know I'll always defend whomever the target for this week's 2 minutes of hate from a Prime Minister who likes to make fun of other cultures by mocking them in their native attire and wearing blackface. Why is it that whenever the Liberal Party brings forth legislation to change criminal laws or the administration of justice, it's always about protecting criminals, never about the victims or their families? It's failing victims. The system is failing everyone. It's failing victims, it's failing the accused, it's failing everyone who's working in it. We have a situation where the public lacks faith in the justice system, and that's what we're beginning to see happen. There's even a call for the Liberal-appointed head of the RCMP to resign. People have lost trust in our public institutions. Everything our government touches, it breaks. Everything is broken. S4 is about technology. Knowing how this government thinks, could Judge Dredd be far behind? The fact is, technology is not a quick fix for what ails the criminal justice system in Canada. The government has all the wrong priorities. For once, this government needs to think about the victims of criminal justice. Someone has to speak for the victims. Earlier this year, a coroner's inquest was concluded into one of the worst cases of multiple partner violence in Canadian history. Basil Borutsky murdered Anastasia Kuzik, Natalie Wormerdam, and Carol Culleton in separate incidents on the morning of September 22nd, 2015 in Renfrew County. Borutsky was well known to all of his victims and to police for a long history of violence. He was a dangerous serial offender with a history of beating women. The three grieving families and our entire community relived the horror of that event through the inquest. Borutsky went on a violent rampage in the Ottawa Valley on that day, and he murdered 3 women: Carol Culleton, Natalie Wormerdam, and Anastasia Kuzik. In their verdict, the jurors determined that Culleton, Wormerdam, and Kuzik all died by homicide. Carol Culleton's death was upper airway obstruction, which is a polite way of saying she was choked to death, while Anastasia Kuzik and Natalie Wormerdam both died of shotgun wounds to the chest and neck. And the violence didn't happen without a warning. All the women were former intimate partners of Borutsky, and the murders were a culmination of abusive behavior that had been happening for over 40 years. He was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility of parole for 70 years. Multiple sentences to be served concurrently for the multiple murders he committed. So prior to the law passed by our Conservative government, the maximum sentence for first-degree murder, even when multiple victims were killed, was a life term with no chance of parole for 25 years. The Conservative government law that I was pleased to vote in favor of allowed for parole terms to be stacked on top of one another in cases involving multiple victims. Serial mass murders like Basil Borutsky is an example of a sentence that takes into consideration the severity of the crime. The Supreme Court has since ruled no more multiple sentences. On Alexander Bissonnette, the Quebec City mosque shooter, who was initially sentenced to 40 years for the murder of 6 people, had that sentence struck down on appeal. The Supreme Court upheld the appeal and ruled that sentences of that length are cruel and unusual and violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, unless the Liberal government brings in new legislation, the court's ruling will mean the maximum sentence for a person can receive for first-degree murder, even in cases of multiple murders, is life with no chance of parole for 25 years. When women are killed because they are women, that's different than first-degree murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, or the general term homicide. It sends the wrong message to the courts. In the case of serial killer Basil Barutsky, a violent offender who openly ignored orders that were part of his probation, he was released anyhow. Bill C-5 is a slap in the face to every woman in Canada by a prime minister who's consumed by his own toxic masculinity. By reducing or eliminating mandatory minimum sentences, a downward pressure on all sentences is exerted, especially in circumstances in which supposedly determinate periods of imprisonment are routinely reduced, halved, or more by early release. If a man such as Barutsky is released early after a triple murder, what sentence will a mere murder receive? So what's all this mean to the people of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke? In the case of C-5, which was brought to the House instead of the Senate, like S-4, Bill C-5 is a radical left-wing bill that would eliminate mandatory minimum penalties. It sends the wrong message to the community and the families of Cheryl Culleton, Natalie Warmerdam, and Anastasia Kuzyk, and women who live in fear of domestic violence.
Well, member for Kitchener Centre on a point of order.
Madam Speaker, I've been listening attentively to the speech from the member. I'm hearing her talk of Bill C-5, mandatory minimum penalties. I don't believe any of that is relevant to Bill S-4, and I'm wondering your thoughts on the relevancy of the speech. Thank you.
The member well knows that there is quite a bit of latitude on how the member has made some references to S4. I will hope that in the 3.5 minutes left of her speech, the member will come back to the subject at hand. Thank you.
So there's a recommendation from the inquest to the federal government to explore adding the term femicide to the criminal code. So what did Canadians get? C5 and S4, okay? And S4 was so important to this government that it's come before us several times, and they just let it lapse on the order paper. Barutsky, the Eastern Ontario man who was sentenced to life with no chance of parole for 70 years for killing 3 women in 2015, can now challenge his sentence due to the Supreme Court ruling. S4 isn't going to fix that. Even if he's not granted parole, his victims and families are forced to relive the crime and loss of their loved ones at regular parole hearings after the 25-year mark. Real justice calls for changes that would prevent such a tragedy from happening again. And tinkering with the system by allowing Zoom into a courtroom is no joke to the victims' families, and that's what S4 is doing. The coroner's inquest into the deaths of Cheryl Culleton, Natalie Warmerdam, and Anastasia Kuzyk wrapped up after hearing extensive testimony from victims' families, their counsel, domestic violence experts, and advocates. And the jury made 86 recommendations based on the inquest, and it's important to know about them, since part of the accountability is awareness. Our awareness and demanding that our public institutions do the right thing to prevent intimate partner violence, IPV, and S4 tinkers with the administration of the court system. It's time to be more cognizant of what is causing the problems. And the first set of recommendations address the need for oversight and accountability. And these initial recommendations recognize the importance of listening to and learning from victims, survivors, and emphasize the need to follow up on implementation. And create a survivor advocate position, understanding that domestic violence victims' experiences with police and the justice system can be really difficult, and the jury recommended having a survivor advocate to advocate on behalf of survivors when they interact with the justice system. They wanted to establish an independent partner violence commission. The jury wants a commission to be established like the one in the UK that can be a voice for survivors and the victims' families. Local activists agree that an independent commission would help ensure the inquest recommendations are followed through and engage in meaningful consultation. By speaking with intimate partner violence survivors, victims, their families, experts in the fields, these consultations would determine the responsibilities and direction of the IPV Commission and evaluate the effectiveness of existing community supports and prevention strategies, including program funding. So I will conclude my remarks by thanking all of those who were involved in the inquest process, including the witnesses who gave so generously of their time along with the women from the anti-violence community in Renfrew County and beyond. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? L'honorable